The news traveled across the winds of Westeros like wildfire. Robb Stark, king in the north, had broken his betrothal not for a Frey girl, but for a Martell princess. It wasn't love that sparked it. It was war. Robb sat in his tent. One cold evening, the flicker of candlelight dancing on his furs, when word came that Doran Martell, the quiet and calculating Prince of Sunspear, was willing to talk terms. Dorne had stayed quiet so far, nursing its old rage for Elia Martell's brutal death during Robert's rebellion. But now, the Martells saw an opportunity. Cersei Lannister ruled through her son, and the realm was cracking under its own weight. The North had declared independence. The Riverlands were in rebellion, and the Iron Throne looked less like a crown, and more like a curse done in secret. Messages flew between the north and the far southern deserts of Dorne. The letters were blunt, Stark-like. The replies flowery, careful, soaked in Martell pride. But one name emerged again and again: Serenia. Martell, niece of Doran, daughter of Oberyn, not yet promised to anyone. Fiery, headstrong, and rumored to be as fierce with her tongue as her uncle was with a spear. She's a viper in silk, they warned Robb. She's our last chance, said Catelyn. Robb knew he had already broken his promise to the Freys by marrying Talisa Maegir. But in this version of things, Talisa never existed. There was no battlefield wedding, no love at first stitch. There was only the war and the cost of crowns. So Robb rode south, disguised, deep into territory hostile to Northerners. A dangerous game, but war demanded boldness. And when he met Serenia Martell in the heat of Sunspear's gardens, he didn't expect her to meet his cold stare with fire. You ride in the heat like a northern ghost, she told him. I expected more from the man they call king in the north, and I expected less from a viper, he replied. They didn't laugh, but their eyes caught on each other. Serenia didn't want to be married off to any highborn fool, but she knew Dorne wanted vengeance, and Doran's plan was clear. If the North and Dorne joined hands, they would split the realm in two. The Lannisters couldn't hold both ends of the map. The Martells wanted justice. The Starks wanted freedom. Both had debts written in blood. So they married. In Sunspear, under the blazing sun and red banners. A wedding as alien to the northern bannermen as the deserts of Dorne themselves. Catelyn Stark barely kept her calm. She had wished for a quiet girl, a northern girl, someone soft to temper her son's fury. Instead, she saw Serenia bold, laughing, drinking with her uncle Oberyn, speaking to men like equals, and telling truths too sharp for any noble daughter. She will ruin him, Catelyn muttered to Maester Luwin. She might just save him. The old man replied, but news of the marriage came too soon to the twins. Lord Walder Frey raged at the insult. A Martell, the southernmost house in the realm, married to the northernmost, and no Frey girl anywhere in sight. Even worse, the Martells had killed Freys before in border disputes. He felt spit upon, betrayed. Again, so the Red Wedding was still being whispered behind his walls, but this time, things wouldn't unfold so easily. Serenia returned with Robb to River Run, cloaked in fur and suspicion. The Northern Lords didn't trust her. The River Lords called her Serpent. But Robb stood by her, and when she stood beside him in the war councils, her words cut deeper than any blade. You fight like wolves in a cage, she said to Lord Umber. Let me show you how serpents strike. She had plans. Dorne had spies, roots, secrets, and a hatred for the Lannisters that burned like wildfire. It wasn't long before whispers reached King's Landing. Robb Stark had taken a southern bride, and now Dorne was preparing for war. Tywin Lannister's cup shattered. When he heard, one thing was clear. The game had changed. ChatGPT said. The first frost had barely kissed the stones of River Run when Serenia Martell made her mark. At first, the northern lords watched her with narrowed eyes. They didn't like her silks, her perfume, or her sharp tongue. They muttered in ale-soaked corners about how she didn't belong. But Serenia wasn't the type to fade into the background. She wasn't born to be quiet. She was Oberyn Martell's kin-raised on poison, politics, and pride. And she knew how to play men like instruments. During the first war council after her arrival, she sat beside Robb without invitation. Lord Karstark's jaw clenched. Greatjon Umber crossed his arms. Even Catelyn's look was stiff. But Robb said nothing, because he knew what Serenia had brought with her. Maps, spies, and names. "I know where Sir Adam Marbrand keeps his supply lines," she said, fingers brushing over a map of the Westerlands. "And I know which of. His captains bed Lannister gold whores on full moons. Dorne's birds sing in all corners of the realm." Karstark scoffed. "Birds don't win wars, princess." She leaned forward, unblinking. "No, but they slit throats while your wolves sleep." Silence. Even Robb didn't interrupt. In that moment, she won something more powerful than favor. She earned fear. Robb didn't always understand his wife. She spoke in riddles, smiled when others were furious, and found joy in things Northerners would call dishonorable. But every night, when the war drained his bones and the shadow of his father's death hung over him, Serenia was there. And she didn't comfort him with soft words. She reminded him he had claws. "Your father died for a realm that spat on honor," she whispered one night, lying in the cold bed they shared. "You fight for wolves who will eat each other the moment they taste blood. Rule for yourself, not for ghosts." He didn't answer then, but her words stayed with him. As winter crept closer, her influence grew. She began sending Dornish scouts north and west, building a network of whispers Robb never had. One such whisper returned with news that made Robb's blood freeze. Tywin Lannister was marching. Not toward them, but toward the twins. And Walder. Frey, who had remained silent since the Martell wedding, had begun gathering food, stockpiling arms, closing gates. Robb clenched his fists. "He means to betray us?" Catelyn looked pale. "He feels slighted. He's a prideful man, and you spurned him." "I chose a queen, not a tavern wench," Serenia said coldly. "Your words aren't helping," Catelyn snapped. "He may still be persuaded." But even as she said it, her voice cracked. Serenia didn't wait for permission. That night, she penned a letter and gave it to a silent Dornish messenger. "Take this to my uncle, and take the other to Prince Doran." Robb read the first before she sealed it. "You're calling for war," he said quietly. "I'm making sure we're not butchered at a wedding feast," she replied. "Dorne rides with fire, and if Frey wants to play host, let him choke on dragon pepper." That was the first time Robb truly feared her, and the first time he respected her the way his bannermen did. 2 weeks later, a reply came. Prince Doran Martell had agreed to act. Dorne would march, not through the narrow lands, but by sea, hidden, up the western coast. Oberyn would lead the vanguard himself. Another note, unsigned, simply read, "We have eyes in the twins, and hands ready." Still, Robb needed to go to the Freys. He couldn't risk burning a bridge before he crossed it. So he made the journey Serenia by his side, Catelyn behind him, Grey Wind walking at his heel. Walder Frey greeted them with a smile full of rot. "My lord king," he said mockingly, "and a little viper from the desert. What a strange match." Serenia smiled, but her eyes were dead. "Stranger things happen at weddings, Lord Frey." That night, they dined under candlelight. The wine was thick, the laughter false. Robb didn't drink, neither did Serenia. But she watched the servers, counted them, watched who held the knives. And she whispered, "There's too many shadows." In this hall, Robb leaned closer. And what do we do? She grinned. Let the Vipers strike first. The music hadn't even started when the killing was supposed to begin. But Serenia, Martell had no intention of dying in a Frey hall. Not tonight. Not after the raven she'd sent. Not after what she'd smelled in the air, something more sour than old meat and Frey wine. It was the scent of fear disguised as hospitality, of poison cloaked in pleasantries. They called her paranoid. They didn't know her bloodline. She had been trained since childhood to read danger like a book. That evening, while Walder Frey droned on with his mockery and false toasts, Serenia's eyes kept flicking to the corners of the room. Her hand never left the dagger under her dress, and she had already counted the exits. 1 guarded, 1 shadowed, 2 bolted shut. I hope you'll enjoy the bedding ceremony, Walder said, spittle clinging to his lips. It's not Dornish, but we do things proper here. The entire hall chuckled like pigs. Serenia gave a sweet smile. Where I come from, we don't wait for the ceremony to shed blood. They thought it was a joke, Dot. It wasn't. She squeezed Robb's hand under the table. It was subtle, but urgent. He turned to her, and she didn't speak. Just tilted her head barely. It was enough. That's when Grey Wings started growling from outside the hall. Robb stood up, sudden. Too sudden, Dot. The music stopped. Every Frey man's hand went to their belt. Walder Frey raised a hand. Leaving so soon, Your Grace? But we were just getting... Then the doors burst open, Dot, not with Frey guards, but with Dornish steel. Oberyn Martell himself walked in first, his spear slick with blood already, his face lit with fury. Behind him poured 50 silent spearmen, dark red cloaks, snake sigils gleaming. Chaos exploded. The trap had been turned. The Red Wedding was rewritten as a massacre of Freys. Robb drew his sword, knocking over the high table as he shielded Catelyn with his own body. Serenia ducked, drew her dagger, and slit the throat of a Frey who had lunged at her, his blade still halfway drawn. Walder Frey screamed, "Treachery! This is treason!" Oberyn's spear pinned him to the chair before the word finished leaving his mouth. "No," Oberyn said calmly. "This is vengeance." Steel clashed against steel. The northern battermen, startled at first, joined in quickly. Lord Bolton, seated near the edge of the hall, stood without drawing a weapon, his eyes locked on Robb, cold, calculating, and then he turned and walked away. Out the door. He didn't fight. He didn't stay. He vanished. Serenia saw it. "That one will be a problem," she whispered. Robb didn't hear. He was dragging Catelyn from the carnage, shouting orders, rallying his men. By the time the blood had dried, over 100 Freys were dead. The twins were soaked in it. The hall stank of fire, death, and Dornish steel. Catelyn was in shock. This wasn't supposed to happen, she muttered. Serenia turned to her, face calm. "No, but it was going to. You just didn't believe it." Catelyn didn't answer. Robb stood over Walder Frey's corpse, breathing hard. His hand still shook, sword dripping. "You brought them early," he said to Serenia. She tilted her head. "You expected me to wait to be slaughtered?" He looked at her, and something passed between them. Not love, not even trust. Understanding. "From this day," Robb said, turning to Oberyn, "the North and Dorne stand as one. No more paper. Alliances. Blood has bound us now." Oberyn nodded. "But you must strike fast. Tywin won't wait." Robb's jaw clenched. "He'll hear of this by morning." Serenia stepped forward. "Then let us send him a gift." That night, they hung the bodies of Walder, Frey's sons from the battlements of the twins. They burned the Frey banners and raised 2, the direwolf. Of Stark and the son and spear of Martell, the message was clear. The Red Wedding had failed. The North would not kneel. Dorne would not forget. And the Lannisters would bleed next. But far away in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister didn't rage. He didn't curse. He just sat in silence, then said, "We'll let them think they've won." And he called for Roose Bolton. The message reached King's Landing before the wine had dried at the Twins. A raven, marked with blood and bearing the broken seal of House Frey, arrived at the Red Keep. The Maester who delivered it couldn't speak for a full minute after reading. He simply handed it to Tywin Lannister with trembling fingers. Tywin read every word slowly. Then he closed his eyes. "Dead?" Cersei asked, pacing. "All of them," Tywin said, his voice cold. "Walder, Frey, his sons, his guards. The Stark boy lives. So does the Martell witch. And Oberyn." He stood, moving to the window, the morning sun pale against his expressionless face. Cersei's anger erupted. That desert snake brought her people into the Twins? Into our alliance? This is your fault. You allowed Dorne to remain quiet too. Long. Tywin didn't look at her. I allowed them to believe we'd forgotten. Now they've revealed themselves. Shiom leaned forward. What do we do? Tywin turned. We call for Roose Bolton. In the north, the fires of war burned. Hotter than ever, Robb rode at the head of his army, the banner of Stark whipping in the wind beside the Martell sun. The victory at the Twins had shaken the realm. House Frey had fallen, the Red Wedding had failed, and the North stood stronger than before, unbroken, undefeated. But victory had a cost. Every man knew it. Catelyn Stark remained quiet, cold-eyed. Since that night, she didn't speak to Serenia. Not out of hatred, but out of fear. She had seen what Serenia was willing to do. She saw it in her calm while the Freys died, in her eyes when the knives came out. She reminded Catelyn too much of the South of the people who had destroyed her husband. Is this who we are now? She asked Robb one morning as they prepared to march west. He looked at her, weary. We are what they've made us. Catelyn didn't argue. She knew it was true. Serenia, for her part, had taken command of Robb's intelligence. Spies reported Lannister movements in the Riverlands, and letters arrived daily from Sunspear. Doran Martell promised support from the sea, and Oberyn kept, pushing Robb toward war. You struck them once, Oberyn said. Strike again, strike deeper, make them bleed. But Serenia urged caution. My uncle wants vengeance, but he has never ruled. Strike too quickly, and we'll burn out before winter even comes. Robb listened to both, but in the end, he followed Serenia. They moved east first, toward Harrenhal, reclaiming strongholds one by one. The Lannisters had pulled their forces back to protect the Heartland, and the Riverlords had begun returning to Robb's cause. Even the Blackfish had taken up arms again, joining Robb in strategy councils and standing beside Serenia, grudgingly, with growing respect. But they all knew one thing. They were waiting for the blow that hadn't come yet. And then, it did. The Boltons turned. The first whisper came from a dying scout who had fled the Dreadfort. Roose Bolton had raised the flayed man-batter, not beside the direwolf, but beside the lion. He's gone to the Lannisters. A man gasped before dying. Robb crushed the letter in his fist. I trusted him. Catelyn wept quietly. You trusted all the wrong men. Serenia didn't say I told you so. But her silence said enough. And then came the second raven. Winterfe. Ul. Burned. Had seized it, torched it, and declared, Roose the new Warden of the North, by royal decree of King Tommen Baratheon. Robb fell to his knees when he read that. Not for the buildings, not for the stone, for the people. They butchered our kin, he whispered. Our blood, our people. Serenia didn't kneel. She stepped forward, voice steady. Then we take it back. We kill Roose Bolton. We hang his. bastard from the highest tower. And we remind the realm that wolves do not forget. Robb stood, his voice iron. No mercy. No mercy. Serenia echoed. The army turned north, but the game was no longer just wolves and lions. Now the snakes had entered the snow, and winter was truly coming. The march north was long, bitter, and soaked in silence. Robb Stark rode ahead of his army, his face colder than the winds that howled across the barrows. His eyes, once bright with the fire of rebellion, were now hollowed out by betrayal. The Freys were one thing, but Roose Bolton? That was different. That was personal. Winterfell had fallen, and Robb could almost hear the stones crying out from. A far dot beside him rode Serenia, cloaked in heavy furs, her Dornish blood unused to the biting cold, but her will unwavering. She had never seen snow before setting foot in the north. Now it clung to her lashes, her cloak, her hair like the land was trying to smother her. She refused to flinch. The people whispered her name in half curses, half prayers. Desert Witch, Snake Queen, Southern Whore, but the whispers had lost their sharpness. Ever since the Red Wedding massacre, the North had grown quiet around her, not out of acceptance, but out of fear and respect. She doesn't blink, said Greatjarn Umber one night near the fire. She watches like she's already seen you. Dead. She's the best thing that happened to that boy, muttered Blackfish, carving meat. Even if she talks too much like her uncle. Serenia didn't care what they said. She was planning. While Robb's bannermen sharpened swords, she sharpened strategies. Ravens flew nightly to her uncle Oberyn and to Dorne Martell. The sea was moving, quietly, stealthily, but it was moving. Meanwhile, Roose Bolton had fortified, Winterfell with brutal efficiency. He knew the north like the back of his hand. Every tree, every trail, every old family betrayal. And worst of all, he wasn't alone. The bastard stood with him. Ramsay Snow. The reports were worse than rumors. Flayed villagers. Women taken and butchered. Old men strung from trees with their tongues torn out. Ramsay had written a letter to Robb. It was crude, spattered with what looked like blood and smelled like rot. Your bitch queen will die screaming. Your wolf will kneel, and I will wear your skin as my wedding cloak. Serenia read it, burned it, and said, he dies last. The war council was called in the Frostfangs, just a few days from Winterfell. It was a grim gathering. Snow piled on tents. Fires barely cut the cold. The north looked dead, but it was only sleeping, waiting to see who would rule it. We strike the Dreadfort first, argued Lord Trewyn. Cut off Bolton's retreat. No, said Robb. We go straight to Winterfell. Bolton won't run. He thinks this is his kingdom now. What? About the bastard? Asked Lord Wormwood. He'll be waiting with traps. Serenia unfurled a map. We don't go through the gates. The crypts run deep, older than any Bolton lie. Let the snakes go under the snow. That night, Serenia took 50 men silent, cloaked, loyal, and led them into the night. Among them was Grey Wind, who moved like a ghost beside her. Not even the snow dared mark his path. The plan was simple. Sneak into Winterfell through the abandoned crypt tunnels, long forgotten by most. Open the gates. Let the north storm in, but plans made in warmth unravel in the cold. Halfway through the tunnels, they found them blocked collapsed stones, wet frost, and worse. A fire trap, recently built. Someone knew they were coming. Above them, in Winterfell's tower, Ramsay Snow smiled as he looked into the night. He'd let them crawl in, and he would drown them in fire. But Serenia had planned for betrayal. While one team went through the crypts, she'd sent another north, behind the castle. Quiet Dornish killers, trained in desert silence, now moved under snow and shadow dot at the right moment. They would strike, and strike they did. Strike they did. Just as Robb began his charge from the trees outside the castle walls, a section of the north wall exploded from within, not with fire, but torn iron in surprise. The Dornishman had climbed the forgotten well shaft and opened the gate. From the inside, Winterfell, for the first time since Theon Greyjoy's betrayal, was breached by the rightful heir. Robb charged in like a storm. The Battle of Winterfell had begun. Steel on snow, blood on stone. Serenia emerged from the tunnels with Grey Wind, her blade already red. She didn't stop to think. She moved like fire wrapped in furs. Her targets were already chosen, but Ramsay was waiting for her, and he wasn't alone. Fell like ash as the courtyard of Winterfell burned. The northern wind screamed over the walls, carrying with it the sound of steel clashing and men dying. Stark banners and Bolton flayed men tangled in the flames as war swallowed the ancient. Stronghold once again. Robb was at the heart of it, swinging his sword like a man possessed. Grey wind tore through enemy lines beside him, a flash of fury and fang. Every time a Bolton fell, the north roared louder. But the Boltons fought like cornered beasts, too mad to break, too cruel to surrender. Robb had only one goal now, find Roose, but Roose wasn't in the courtyard. He wasn't even on the battlefield. He had gone underground, the coward's path into the keep's dungeons, where the walls were thick and the exits few. Robb sent men after him. None returned. Meanwhile, above it all, Ramsay Snow watched from the broken tower. He grinned when he saw her, Serenia Martell, standing among the flames, blood soaking her gloves, her dagger dripping. He had waited for this. He had dreamed of it. And he had prepared. She didn't see the arrow until it was too late. It whistled past her cheek, grazing the edge of her hood, so close it took a lock of her hair with it. She spun, drawing a knife. But the archer had already ducked behind stone. Another arrow hit the dirt near her feet, and then a voice echoed down from the tower. Snake, pretty little snake, come slither for me. Ramsay. She didn't hesitate. She ran up the spiral steps, past bodies, some still warm, some already stiff. Dornish blood, northern blood. Her people. Each step was a promise. She found him in the highest chamber, seated on a chair made of wolf pelts and bones, and he was smiling. Look at you, he said. The Viper's niece, the Queen of the North. What did you think this would be? A duel? A speech? You're not in Dorne now, girl. You're in my home. She didn't speak. She moved. He lunged, first dagger flashing low, cruel and jagged. She spun away, slashing upward, drawing blood across his ribs. He laughed, actually laughed. Oh yes, he said, this will be fun. They circled each other like wild animals, knives gleaming in firelight. She was faster, precise. He was erratic, brutal. He bit, he kicked, he screamed, and then he got her. The dagger slipped under her arm, cutting deep into her side. She staggered. He grabbed her by the hair, slammed her head into the wall. I've killed whores prettier than you, he hissed. But none wore crowns. Serenia spit blood into his face. Then she smiled. You forgot something. He blinked. What? Grey wind. The direwolf burst through the door with a snarl that shook the tower. Ramsay turned just in time to scream. It was short. Blood painted the stone. Bones cracked. Screams stopped. Serenia slid down the wall, clutching her bleeding side. Grey wind padded over, muzzle red, eyes bright. He nudged her once, gently. I'm fine, she whispered. Tell your master. I'm fine. But she WASN single quotes T. down below. Robb stormed into the great hall, where the last Bolton men had barricaded themselves. Among them was Roose, calm as ever, hands behind his back, eyes cold as ice. You've come far, boy, Roose said. But not far enough. Robb didn't speak. He just raised his sword. "You can rule the ashes if you like," Roose continued, voice low. "But the North remembers nothing but blood." Robb moved. Roose parried, but he was slower now. Older, weaker. The fight was short. The last blow drove. Robb soared through Roose's gut, pinning him to the high table where House Stark once feasted. The North roared. Winterfell was retaken. But as Robb rushed to the tower to find Serenia, his heart raced like never before. He found her there, alive but pale, barely conscious, lying in a pool of her own blood with Grey Wind standing guard. "No," he whispered, falling to his knees. "No, no, no." She looked up at him and smiled, weakly. "Told you I'd save your kingdom." He held her close. "Don't you dare leave me." She coughed. "I already came too far north for you." Mesters rushed in. Her fate hung by a thread. But the war was over. Ramsay was dead. Roose was gone. And the North was Stark again, because of a Martell who refused to kneel. ChatGPT said snow fell softer now. Winterfell stood tall again, though its walls still bore the black scars of fire and blood. Smoke drifted from the rebuilt forges. The banners of House Stark and House Martell fluttered together above the battlements, and the courtyard was once again filled with the sounds of hammers, drills, and drills, not screams. But peace had come at a price. Serenia Martell lay in the solar above the great hall, wrapped in furs and bandages. The wound from Ramsay's dagger had gone deep, too deep for even Maester Elric's skilled hands to fully mend. She drifted, in and out of fevered dreams, whispering in tongues no northerner could understand. Robb never left her side. Every day he sat by the bed, watching her face pale and flush and pale again. He held her hand, whispered stories of the days to come, of the children they might have, of warm sands and frozen forests, of ruling not from fear, but from fury earned and survived. But he didn't know if she could hear him. Outside, the North began to remember. The traitors were gone. Frey, Bolton, Lannister sympathizers, dead or fled. The bannermen had returned, one by one, to swear fealty again. The old words were spoken. The North remembers. And now they remembered who saved them. The Queen from Dorne, they called her. The Viper Bride, the Wolf's Flame, still there. Were whispers, always whispers. She's not of the North. She brought foreign blood, foreign gods. Starks don't rule with serpents. Robb heard every word and ignored them. In the weeks following the battle, he held court. From the broken throne of Winterfell, cloaked in black and gray. His voice was sterner now, his kindness measured. He had bled too much to be a boy anymore. War had made him something else. One cold morning, he received a raven from the south. King Tommen Baratheon had issued a royal decree. Robb Stark was to be named a traitor again, his lands forfeit, and a new army led by none other than Sir Kevan Lannister was being raised to march north. They were coming. King's Landing refused to let go. Robb stared at the letter for a long time. Then he burned it. "They will march," he told his bannermen, "but we will not kneel." The North prepared for war again, but this time they were ready. Dorne had promised ships. The Iron Islands had grown restless and whispered of rebellion. Even in the Vale, there were murmurs that the boy Lord Robin Arryn was sickly and surrounded by wolves of his own. Serenia awoke 3 nights later. Robb was sleeping in the chair beside her when her voice broke through the stillness. "You look like a crow in mourning," she rasped. He snapped awake, rushing to her side, eyes wide, voice breaking. "You're awake, you're. I'm not dying yet," she whispered. "I still have a kingdom to help you burn." He kissed her forehead and said nothing for a long time, just held her. In the days that followed, she began to rise. Again, slowly, but stronger each morning. The northern lords came to see her, not all out of love, but out of recognition. She had bled with them. She had killed for them. And in return, she asked for nothing. But her ambition had not vanished. She called Robb to her chambers when she could stand again. Her voice was quiet, her eyes deadly calm. "Winterfell is yours," she said, "but the realm is not safe. As long as Cersei breathes, as long as Lannisters rule, there is no peace. You know that." Robb nodded. "They will keep sending lions north," she continued, "until we rip out the pride." "What are you asking me?" Robb said. "I'm asking you to be more than a king in the snow," she said. "I'm asking you to be a conqueror." Robb didn't answer right away. He stood by the window, watching the snow fall on the walls his father once ruled. "I never wanted this," he said finally. "I know," she replied, "but neither did your father. And they still killed him." The next day, a raven flew from Winterfell to Dorne, another to Pike, and one more to the Vale. And on the battlements of Winterfell, the banners changed. Again, not just the wolf, not just the sun, but something new. A crowned wolf wrapped in flame. Robb Stark would no longer just defend the north. He would take the war south. He would bring winter to King's Landing. The march south began beneath skies that bled gray. Winter was here, not the whisper of it, not the threat, but the full weight of it pressing down on the land. And yet the banners of House Stark and House Martell moved through the blizzards like flames refusing to die. Across the neck, through the cracked stones of Moat Cailin, past the bones of ancient giants and old, broken oaths, they marched. Robb Stark was done waiting God. He no longer rode as the boy king of the north. He rode in black and crimson, his armor, reshaped to carry both the direwolf and the sun and spear. At his side, Serenia Martell rode once more. Her blade returned to her hip, her breath now strong again in the cold. They weren't just husband and wife anymore. They were a dynasty in the making. The alliance grew. From the sea came House Martell's fleet, led by Prince Oberyn himself. Dozens of sleek black ships filled with spearmen and venom-tipped arrows. From the east, a splinter of House Greyjoy arrived not for loyalty, but for opportunity. Yara Greyjoy had no love for the Lannisters, and the idea of choking trade routes and storming southern shores amused her. Even the Vale stirred. Littlefinger's schemes had begun to unravel. Lord Royce took control of young Robin's household and sent ravens to Winterfell under a banner of neutrality. But Robb knew what it meant. The Eyrie would not stand in his way, and the small folk whispered again. "The young Wolf lives." He took back Winterfell. He married fire. Now he brings it. The realm had been ruled by Lannisters for too long. Their gold no longer inspired awe. Only fear, and even that was cracking. When Robb's army reached the Riverlands, they found the lands broken and bitter. But the Blackfish had returned to River Run, and when Robb rode into the castle's courtyard, Edmure Tully bent the knee without a word, that no banners were raised against him in the Riverlands. The Freys were dead, the Boltons destroyed. The Lannisters were isolated, clinging to a throne no one respected. And in King's Landing, the lions roared louder in desperation. Queen Cersei had locked herself in the Red Keep, surrounding herself with pyromancers and rumors. Sir Kevin Lannister held the walls with a shrinking army, and the High Septon spoke of omens and fire in the sky. The people had started rioting again, only this time. They weren't starving for food, but they were starving for change. Robb didn't lay siege right away. He did what Tywin would have done. He starved the city, cut trade routes, blocked the ports, turned merchants into spies, made the poor hate their queen, and the gold cloaks fear shadows. Every day, Serenia stood on the hill, overlooking Blackwater Bay, watching the city rot from within. They'll burn it before they give it to us. Robb said one night, standing beside her. They'll try, she replied. But this time, there is no wildfire. Just ice and steel. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei drank herself into oblivion each night, gripping the Iron Throne like it might crawl away from her. Tommen, her last remaining son, was silent now. Not cruel, not brave, just broken. When the gates finally opened, they didn't open with fire. They opened with surrender. Sir Kevin Lannister laid down his sword in front of the great sept. The gold cloaks threw open their barracks. The bells rang not for victory, but for change. Robb rode into the city with no crown on his head. He didn't need one. The people lined the streets, cold and quiet, watching the man who had defied death, who had killed traitors, who had married fire, and now returned, not as a usurper, but as a reckoning. And beside him, Serena Martell held her head high. They entered the Red Keep together. Cersei was waiting on the throne, still clinging to a goblet, still sneering. Another Stark? She spat. You lot die so easily. Robb didn't even draw his sword. He just looked at her with the weight of every name she had ordered killed. Eddard, Catelyn, Sansa's pain, Arya's exile, Jon's silence. You'll stand trial, he said, and you'll answer for what you've done. She laughed, but it was hollow. They dragged her away screaming, the goblet clattering to the floor. And for the first time in years, the Iron Throne stood empty. Robb did not sit on it that day. Instead, he stood before it, turned to the gathered lords and banners, and spoke plainly. No more dragons, no more lions, no more kings who hide behind crowns. We will rebuild Westeros not as kingdoms, but as a realm where wolves and snakes fight side by side. The Great Council met weeks later. Some called for a crown. Some wanted to declare independence. But in the end, a compromise was struck. The North would remain free, but it would guide the realm through its scars. And Robb Stark and Serena Martell would rule not as king and queen, but as wardens of the realm, protectors of the peace forged in blood and ash. Years passed. Children were born wolf-eyed and flame-hearted. The old world faded, but the story remained of the wolf who married the viper, of the red wedding that failed, of the queen who bled for the North. And of a realm once shattered, now stitched together by a Stark sword and a Martell's fire.